The black horse arrived at twilight. Not galloping, not breathing, just arriving as if carved from night itself. No hoofprints behind it, no shadow beneath it. Its eyes were empty as old wells, and its flanks bore a seal burned so deep it glowed even in dusk. The sigil of Carrot Ulcer's first betrayal, a sun turned upside down, its rays weeping downward. No one dared approach it. Not the guards on the parapets, whose swords trembled in their scabbards. Not the priests in their scented shawls who watched from behind latticed doors. Not even the dogs barked. The horse stood unmoving at the eastern gate, as if waiting to be acknowledged or claimed. Inside the palace, Queen Layla bint Haroun sat cross-legged on a cushion of blue silk, her fingers stained with ink and pomegranate juice. She had not spoken in 3 days. She did not need to. Round her, the silence hung like incense, thick, sacred, unbreathable. The council whispered of omens. The astrologers begged her to stay behind the veils. She only looked once out the carved window at the horse with the mark of fire. And then she stood. A hush fell across the inner courtyards. She walked, barefoot through the gardens, past the fig trees that no longer bore fruit. Past the fountains where fish once glimmered like coins and now floated belly up. Her white veil trailed behind her, dragging through fallen petals and blood from a bird just slaughtered on the altar. The scent of dust clung to her skin like prophecy. At the eastern gate, the black horse did not move, nor did she. Layla reached out, not in fear, not in awe, but like one touches an old wound, familiar and certain. And as her hand brushed the beast's mane, the gates opened with a groan that sounded like grief being remembered. She mounted in silence. The people of Carrot Ulcer watched from rooftops and shadowed thresholds, their mouths full of unsaid prayers. No drums, no horns, no cries followed her. Only the rustle of cloth as elders lowered their eyes. Only the sudden sharp cry of a child who did not know what was being lost. And in that stillness, Queen Layla rode out into the dunes. They called it sacrifice. A queen trading herself not for gold or love or glory, but for survival. The desert tribes would accept no envoy but her. No vow but her presence. They wanted blood tied to lineage, not promises inked on scrolls. They demanded a womb, not a treaty. And Layla, who had never wept, who had once offered her shadow to a blind girl so she might feel shade, gave herself over to the sand. Night fell quickly beyond the city walls. The desert is not a place of slow changes. It swallows day and breath in equal silence. But those who remained behind in Carrot Ulcer felt the shift like a blade drawn across a throat. A thread had been cut, balance undone. The first scream came with the second moon. It rose from the deepest well, once called the Eye of the Prophet, a scream like a flute choked with fire. The water, which had been rationed to drops, turned black, frothy, then thick, then ash. When they drew up the bucket, it carried not water but hair, long braided, wet with something that sizzled when touched. Within hours, the palace granaries erupted. Not with fire, but silence. Rats emerged from the shadows, dragging each other in their teeth, eyes white, tails twitching as if possessed by wind. The guards struck them down, but more came, pouring like tar from cracks in the marble floors. By the third night, the mirrors in the queen's chamber shattered all at once, with no storm, no tremor, no cause, just a sound like bones sighing, and then 1,000 shards, each showing a different face, none of them hers. The high priest fled first. He wrapped the sacred texts in goat hide, clutched them to his chest, and ran into the dunes weeping. They say he was found days later with sand packed into every orifice's eyes, his mouth, ears, as though the desert itself had wanted to silence his screams. Then the baker vanished, then the scribes, then the horses. What remained was not a city, but a husk. The air grew heavier, as if morning demanded its own atmosphere. Mothers stopped naming their children. Lovers kissed with their eyes open. The moon refused to rise full, offering only crescents like blades. Those who stayed behind did not speak of the queen. They spoke only in metaphor of veils caught in thorns, of horses without riders, of wells that remembered. They never said her name. It was no longer safe. And then the wind came. Not a breeze, a moaning tide. It roared from the south with the voice of every lost woman the city had ever buried. 1,000 laments braided into a single shriek. It tore banners from towers. It ripped gates from hinges. When it finally reached the golden dome, it peeled it open like a fruit, exposing the hollow center of a throne now empty. One by one, the minarets crumbled. One by one, the doors refused to close. And then the silence came, thicker than storm, heavier than death. The kind of silence that stains the skin. The kind that follows guilt, not grief. When the last survivor crawled from the western gate, blind from sand, barefoot from fire, clutching nothing but a rusted key and a song she no longer remembered. The words to the city behind her had already vanished. No one knows how. No one saw it sink, burn, or fall. It simply was no more. Only the wind remained, and the key. They say she wandered for days, singing to stones, offering the key to trees and birds and her own shadow. That she finally reached the southern port, collapsed at the feet of fishermen, and whispered, it screamed. And that some nights, when the moon refuses its full face and the dunes rise like ghosts, the earth near Karat Ulcer breathes, shivers, calls. They say the sand remembers. If you press your ear to it, if you dare lie where the queen once knelt, you will hear it. Not her voice, not the prayers, but the hoofbeats of a rider who does not turn. And behind her, a city of silence still trying to scream. The desert was never empty. Even when the stars vanish behind veils of heat, and the dunes look like bones waiting to be buried again. The desert holds voices, older than kings, older than cities, the kind of voices that do not speak. But remember, Queen Layla rode into that remembering. By the time she crossed the third ridge, the black horse beneath her had begun to vanish. Not all at once, not like smoke, but piece by piece. First its tail, then its hooves, then its scent, until Layla rode something that felt more like silence than beast. It left no tracks, it cast no shadow. Only its breath, cold and steady, proved it lived at all. She was expected. The desert tribes had not sent messengers, they sent dreams. For 13 nights before her arrival, the nomads saw her face in their fires, her eyes in their children, her silence in their wives. The elders called her the one with no anchor. The girls braided sand-colored thread into their hair, in her honor. The seers stitched songs into their shawls to catch her footsteps when they came. And when she did, barefaced, sand-soaked, unbroken, they knew she was not a queen. She was the reckoning of a queen. They led her not into a tent, but into a hollow carved from the side of a black mountain, an ancient wound in the earth where no wind entered and no echo left. They called it Ulcer, the mother of secrets. Here, only the elders spoke, and even they, with words laced in centuries, stepped carefully around the firelight as if afraid of casting too long a shadow. The leader of the Ashran stood then. His name was Sakra. His face was carved by sun and sorrow, a face that had buried 5 sons and fed 3 wars. Around his neck hung a strip of skin tattooed in silver. His voice was made of gravel and rust. "You come to trade," he said. "Not a question, a statement." Layla did not bow. "I come to remember what your people helped my ancestors forget." There was silence. The fire hissed. Somewhere, a child coughed. A crow rare in the desert cawed once, then vanished from the cliff. Sakra nodded slowly, as if testing the weight of her sentence. "You are brave," he said finally. "Or you are broken? Which one do you need me to be?" The elders did not answer, but something shifted then, not in them, not in her, but in the mountain itself. The air turned warm as breath. The stones grew damp beneath her feet. and from the back of the hollow, where no torch reached, a woman stepped forward. She was, draped in gray, hair like silver cords, eyes like burned honey. The matriarch, her name was not spoken. Not even the fire dared call her by it. She raised a bowl carved from bone, rimmed with copper, and offered it to Layla. The liquid inside shimmered like oil, but smelled like dates and blood. This was not welcome. This was not ritual. This was judgment. Layla took it. She did not sip. She drank. And when she did, the darkness behind her eyes bloomed. Visions not of future, but memory, ancient and terrible. She saw a queen before her, veiled in gold, standing at the same gate she once rode through. She saw her whisper into a chalice, saw her son become a tyrant, saw a blade slipped between the ribs of a lover, saw fire, saw silence, saw a curse passed down not in blood, but in choice. And then she saw herself not as queen, not as rider, but as root. The drought had not begun in the skies. It began in her lineage. When she opened her eyes, she was kneeling. Her hands were bleeding. The bowl had shattered, and the matriarch was smiling. "You are no longer a queen," she said. "You are now a bride." Layla did not ask of whom, because she already knew. Not of man, not of tribe, but of the desert itself, the spirit of all things that are lost and never seek return. And the desert accepted her. They called her the bride of dust and flame. She did not sleep for 40 nights. Not because she could not, but because the stars would whisper too loud if she closed her eyes. She learned their names: Al-Nashira, the one who forgets; Thuban, the old serpent; Zahir, the twin-faced star. She learned how to bathe in sand, how to hear footsteps through heat, how to command scorpions and bind dreams into clay. She forgot the taste of figs. She forgot the weight of silk. But she remembered everything else. The tribes watched, some with awe, some with dread, some with hunger. There were those among them, young blades with old blood, who did not want a queen, nor a bride, nor a seer. They wanted war, vengeance, fire in return for famine, in return for treaties. And so they plotted. They said her heart was too soft, that it beat for cities, not soil, that her blood was half betrayer, that she would one day summon the black horse again, but this time not to ride away, but to return with armies. So they came for her. 7 warriors, 7 knives. At dusk, she did not scream. She did not summon guards. She walked into the hollow of the mountain again, barefoot, carrying only a copper mirror wrapped in goat hide. And there she sang, a song in no language, a song in every language, a song of birth and burial, of thirst and thunder, of what it means to belong to a place so deeply it refuses to let you die. The warriors reached her, but their knives did. Not, they say, the earth swallowed them. Others say the mountain wept, and in its tears were scorpions. Others say they turned upon each other, weeping, kissing each other's eyes before plunging blades into their own necks. What is known is this: by dawn, the mountain had sealed its mouth. And Layla stood above it, hands clean, voice silent. She was no longer a bride, she was now a part of the land itself. And far away in the city that had once sent her, the final bell fell from the temple tower, not tolled, fell and cracked the earth beneath it. The people gathered, not in mourning, but in dread, for they had forgotten her. And now the land had not. The sky hung low like an old parchment smeared in ash. Dawn broke without color. It was not light that stirred the city's breathless silence, but the moan of an eastern wind carrying with it the dry whisper of distant caravans and the long dead, ghosts of forgotten trade. Beneath a slab of worn sandstone, half buried in the southern courtyard of the temple square, the workers unearthed something not meant to be disturbed. Not gold, not jewels, but salt packed into a ceremonial tomb, lined with silk that had turned brittle from centuries of sleep. The air shifted when it opened, like the breath of a grave remembering its purpose. The silk, once dyed with the crushed flowers of foreign lands, had rotted into ribbons. Still, one could trace the intricate stitchwork, symbols of water and stars of 7 birds encircling a well, the emblem of the House of Naramzor. A dynasty extinguished not by blade or war, but by silence. Its fall never recorded. Its name scrubbed from stone. A curse, the elders once murmured, for trading their daughters for Persian steel and marrying sons into Sogdian hands. Whispers spread through the laborers like fever. Salt was sacred and damning. It preserved, it purified. But to bury someone? In it, layered, wound, wrapped in silk, was to bind their soul in the nether, never to return. A punishment reserved for oathbreakers, or worse, betrayers of the covenant. The tomb bore no name, but in the dark folds of silk, one worker, an old man with river scars on his arms, found a clasp of copper in the shape of an eye, and the seal of the forgotten Queen Yatura, daughter of the moon, mother to none. Her name had vanished from the stones, but not from the bloodlines. She was the one who vanished the priests during the famine of the scales. When grain was weighed against breath and the temple tied dim bones, there was a tale that she walked into the sand one day, her eyes veiled in linen soaked in indigo, that the salt wind followed her, that she sang to it until the dunes swallowed her voice. And here she was, or a shadow of her, mummified in a silence more complete than death. One of the guards, a young man whose teeth were marked with turquoise from the well water, insisted the tomb be resealed, that it should be drowned again in sand, forgotten anew. But the court scribe disagreed. He believed this tomb was a key not to treasure, but to understanding what broke the city before the flames, before the silence. The scribes documented every inch. Every thread of silk was measured. Every fold was brushed with oil. But no one dared to touch the salt directly. It was left there undisturbed, like a second body, a ghost beside the queen. Stranger still was the inscription carved inside the lid, written in Old Kuruni, a language spoken only in the River Age. It read, "I carried their names in my belly and buried them in my song. May no god answer me, a curse, a confession, or a plea. No priest would touch it. No elder would speak her name aloud." But that night, in the quarters behind the broken colonnade, a child was born to one of the workers, still and silent, covered in a thin film of salt. The midwives wept. They did not bury it. They wrapped the child in reed matting and left it at the temple gates, where dogs circled but did not bite. The queen's tomb had been opened, but her voice had never left. By morning, the silk had begun to rot faster, as if time itself had returned to claim her. Flies hatched from nowhere. The ink on the scrolls began to bleed. They burned the reed matting in secret. Not to destroy the child, it was already gone, but to close the door they feared had opened. The salt was left untouched, but the tomb was reburied, this time under lime and crushed bone. A false grave was marked atop it, a decoy. Yet in the marketplace, a story had begun to spread. That the woman in the tomb had not died. That she had buried herself alive, singing to the sand to hold her breath for her. That the city was punished for forgetting her. That she would return, if her name was spoken in full. But no one remembered her name. Only her symbol remained. The 7 birds circling a well, found weeks later, carved into a child's palm, though no blade had touched him. The wind grew hotter, drier, the wells tasted of copper. Some began to say the queen was not cursed, but that she had bound the city in a spell of protection, and now, by opening her tomb, they had broken it. Others said nothing, simply packed their belongings and vanished into the night. Who remained began to dream of salt. Salt in their mouths, salt in their eyes, salt spilling from their hands. The scribes, disturbed but unable to let go of the mystery, began translating the fragments found inside the tomb. One passage stood out, believed to be from her final letter. They traded my womb for camels, my voice for silence. I will rot, slower than the city that held me, but final act of vengeance. A monument not to life, but to the memory of being buried alive, not beneath earth, but beneath erasure. In the years that followed, that square remained untouched. Even when children played nearby, they never stepped into its sunless center. A crack formed in the ground there one summer, not wide, but deep, as if the earth remembered something it could not speak of. And in the distance, the wind carried songs no one taught and no one admitted to hearing. There were roads no longer drawn on maps, paths whispered about in broken dialects. Older than any kingdom still standing, worn not by wheels but by feet that bled in silence. Beneath the dunes that swallowed the lower quarter of the city, one such road slept. It had not felt breath or bone for centuries. Till now, the discovery came not by scholars or scribes, but by a herder's boy, a mute child named Camille, who often wandered the old salt flats at dusk, chasing shadows that didn't always move with the sun. On the evening of the second blood moon, he returned pale, his feet coated in red clay instead of sand. He clutched a smooth shard of obsidian, shaped like a feather, and pointed toward the dunes. They followed him at dawn, and there beyond the dune called Mother's Spine, where no vegetation had grown in 3 generations. The wind had peeled back the skin of the desert to reveal what looked like carved stone. It was not a wall. It was a road black basalt, inlaid with ivory, patterned in crescents and talons. A serpent's path, straight as a needle, pointing eastward where no known city stood. The road groaned under their steps, as if waking from a long, unwilling sleep. Birds would not fly overhead. The sky dimmed, though the sun shone bright. The elders summoned the mapkeepers, who arrived trembling not from fear, but awe. They'd long debated the rumors of a vanished trade artery that once connected the sapphire mines of the southern kingdom to the libraries of Alhaith. But this was older still. The patterns matched nothing in their archives. And then the carvings began to appear, first faint and rubbed raw by centuries of wind. Then sharper, darker, cleaner the further they followed the road. Symbols of a language that predated even the River Age. Glyphs of wings wrapped in thorns. Single phrase repeated every half mile. Return not with fire, return only with blood. By the 5th mile, sand no longer covered the road. Instead, it flanked it, respectfully parted as though unwilling to bury what refused to be forgotten. Along the sides, broken columns lay like bones, their tips etched with names long erased from human memory, but still held by stone. At the 7th mile, they found the first skeleton, upright arms wrapped around its own ribs, mouth open in a scream turned to dust. A coin lay in its throat. An ancient burial custom, but twisted, the coin was nailed in with obsidian. A warning, perhaps, or a lock. The further they walked, the colder the air became, though the sun burned the same. Their breath fogged. The dunes no longer shifted. Even time seemed to slow, not stop but bend, like a reed in stagnant water. Then they came upon a gate. It rose from the earth without wall or city, a freestanding arch made of moonstone, still slick with moisture, though the land had not seen rain in a decade. A gate with no hinges, no doors, but with a riddle carved into its topmost curve. The tongue that speaks my name must first taste silence. Many refused to go further, a handful, including the scribe Tamar. A linguist born under a starless sky stepped through. They said the air changed at once, grew heavier, richer, the kind of air that pressed into your lungs with memory, not breath. Tamar wrote that it smelled like rusted incense and milk left too long in the sun, like old prayers forgotten beneath children's bones. The road continued beyond the gate, this time flanked by statues, tall, thin, eyeless. Each had a hand lifted, palm forward, Some said it was a warning. Others believed it was welcome. One of the explorers placed their hand against the stone and bled. The palm had teeth. Tamar noted in his journal, "This is no mere road. This is a covenant, a scar upon the land. A path not built for trade, but for remembrance. We are not the first to walk it, we will not be the last. But few will return. By the 13th mile, all vegetation was gone. Not even bones of birds remained. The sky grew pale and the sun hung too still, like a painting that refused to move. They stopped to rest, but their shadows no longer fell in the same direction. Some had none at all. And then the dreams began. Each member of the group reported, waking in the night with sand in their mouths, hearing voices whispering behind their eyes. One saw their mother's face, though she died 20 years ago, speaking a language she never knew. Another wept at dawn and refused to speak again. Tamara wrote, "This road does not lead to a place, but to a question." The kind asked only once and never answered the same way twice. When the first death came, they buried her in silence. Not in the sand, but on the road itself. Her blood soaked into the basalt like ink on parchment, and the glyphs glowed faintly in response. They realized then the road remembered. It fed on offering. The others argued about returning, but the road would not let them. Behind them, the gate was gone. Only desert. No trail, no footprints. Even the stars had shifted, constellations warped and unmoored. It was Camille, the mute child, who led them onward, his eyes unfocused, his steps sure. He had begun to hum, low, and broke in the same tune each night. One the others began to hear in their own dreams, a melody wrapped in a woman's voice, soaked in salt and silk. Tamar feared they were nearing the end, or the beginning of something older than death. His last entry read, "We walk beneath the skin of memory. This road is a wound, and we are the infection or the cure." They never returned. Only Camille's obsidian feather was found weeks later, buried outside the queen's false tomb, where the earth had cracked and salt had begun to bloom again, petal by petal, like a forgotten crown. In the silence after the lost expedition, the world forgot again, as it always does when something disappears without a monument. But one mind did not sleep. One hand still moved, tracing letters in the dust of oil lamps, scribbling symbols on dried fig leaves, binding thoughts that bled into parchment. His name was Tamar, the scribe who never returned. And yet, somehow, his voice lingered. It began with a journal, found months later in the possession of a caravan that claimed to have passed no one on the southern route. The leather-bound book smelled of smoke and storm. It was warm to the touch. The first few pages were blank, but slowly, like ink blooming in reverse, the words began to reappear. "I am not lost. I am remembered." No one could explain it. Scribes attempted to copy the text, but the parchment crumbled beneath their hands. Only Tamar's original script remained intact, written in a dialect long extinct, one only he had fully mastered. The ink seemed to move when stared at too long, like watching something sleep with one. I open. The Queen's Council, restless after the collapse of the Eastern Wall and the strange disappearance of her son's falconers, summoned the High Translators. They read Tamar's entries aloud in the moonlit chambers, one by one, until they reached the 22nd passage, the one scholars would later name the serpent hymn. It was not a prayer, nor was it a warning. It was an invitation. To the one who dares drink memory from the throat of the world, the serpent awaits. Its scales are names, its eyes, silence. It will not grant power. It will grant clarity, and that is far more dangerous. The queen, always hungry for what lay beneath the veil, took the passage as prophecy. She had once been a priestess before she crowned herself in her husband's blood. Her dreams had grown dry since brittle things of dust and mirrors. But when the serpent hymn was spoken, she wept without knowing why. She ordered the old maps unrolled and began to trace the ancient roads until she found the one that had disappeared. The one Tamar had walked, the scribe and the serpent. The phrase began to haunt her. Court poets whispered it in stanzas they couldn't explain. Children mumbled it in sleep. The queen saw it carved into her silver goblet. One morning, though, the servant swore it had been blank the night before. So she summoned a new scribe. His name was Amin, young, wide-eyed, yet stubbornly devout to logic and ink. He did not believe in cursed roads or serpent hymns, but he believed in the mind that had written them. Tamar had been his teacher once, a man who spoke languages like they were rainwater and made death feel like punctuation. Amin accepted the queen's offer. Not for gold, not for glory, but to understand why his master had walked into silence and left behind a song. He retraced the path. From the cracked stone mile markers to the obsidian road Amin walked as Tamar had. The glyphs were still there, glowing faintly beneath layers of moonlight and dust. The ivory inlays pulsed gently beneath his feet, like a heartbeat remembering its owner. When he reached the freestanding gate of moonstone, Amin bowed. He placed no offerings. He whispered no name. He only waited. The silence that answered him was deep, so deep it pulled the breath from his lungs. And then, without wind, without sound, the gate bloomed. It didn't open, it revealed. A desert not of sand, but of mirrors. Endless sky reflecting itself into madness. And above it, coiled in the heavens like an inked constellation, was the serpent. Its body stretched across the stars, winding through galaxies like forgotten poems. Its mouth was closed, but its tongue moved. A ribbon of gold flame, spelling out symbols too old for bone to remember. Amin stepped forward, and the world rippled. Each step fractured his shadow, split his name across 1,000 reflections. He walked not toward the serpent, but into it, the sky folding around him, the stars blinking like wet eyes. He did not scream. He wrote. Inside the serpent there was no time, only memory. The road Tamar had spoken of wasn't a place. It was a wound in reality, a scar where memory pooled, unguarded. Amin saw cities that never existed, lives never lived. He tasted the grief of a mother who had never borne children, felt the joy of a child who had never died. The what? Ifs of 1,000 worlds. The serpent, it seemed, fed on memory's echo, not just of what was, but what could have been. Every possibility, every silence. Then he saw Tamar, not in flesh, but in thought, a shape woven from written language and grief. The elder scribe smiled a sad, paper-thin smile, and spoke in a voice that echoed like ink drying. We are all authors here. But the serpent only reads endings. Amin understood then. The road, the glyphs, the bleeding stone, they were not warnings or curses. They were punctuation. Marks left by lives too heavy to carry alone. And the serpent, ancient and patient, was not a god. It was a librarian. It remembered because no one else could. Amin did not return to the city in body. But months later, parchment began appearing in the queen's chambers, folded like scales, stained with the scent of fig and storm. Each bore Amin's script, but none could trace the courier. He had written, "The serpent does not sleep. It waits beneath every silence, between every forgotten name. You need not walk the road to find it. You need only remember." Queen aged quickly after that. Her hair silvered in weeks. Her breath grew shallow, but her eyes saw farther than ever. She burned her royal scrolls. She rewrote her laws. And every night she dreamed of ink flowing like blood across black stone, with a serpent curled gently at her feet, reading aloud the memories she had long buried. She was once a priestess of the moon, daughter of riverlight, handmaid to the breath between words, for she became queen. But power reshapes the soul like a potter's fire, hardening what was once soft, cracking what was once whole. She had taken the crown not as inheritance, but as conquest. She had bathed her hands in prophecy and blood, and now, in the dusk of her reign, silence came to claim her throne. They began calling her the Queen of the Second Silence, not in insult, not in reverence, but in awe, for there had been a first silence, the one that birthed the world. And now, she ruled the second, the silence that follows remembrance when memory becomes scripture. Her face was no longer youthful. The silver in her hair had thickened like frost on ancient stone. She moved slowly, but with the grace of someone who understood how time bent for those who listened. She had dismissed her court, turned the palace into a library. Scrolls hung like curtains. Books formed barricades where once nobles had plotted. The throne was unoccupied, draped in black cloth. Her seat was a simple wooden chair beneath a carved obsidian arch, etched with the sigils from the serpent hymn. Every morning she walked the hall of unspoken names where she had the names of the forgotten carved into walls of salt and soot. Names of servants buried without graves, children who vanished in famines, rebels who died screaming into wind, lovers who disappeared mid-sentence. Her hands often bled from tracing the engravings. She said it helped her remember they were real. The people feared her now, but not with the fear of tyrants. This was the fear of those who see someone who has glimpsed the end and chosen to walk back anyway. When storms struck, she stood on the balcony and let the rain ruin her robes. When children cried, she silenced the palace bells and let them wail. When the stars shifted, she wrote. And she wrote as if each letter were a wound that needed tending. Then came the raven. It appeared one morning, perched on the broken statue of her husband in the East Garden, the statue she had refused to repair since his death. The raven bore a crown of thorns tangled in its feathers and a strip of parchment tied to its leg. No one else saw it, only she. The message it carried was brief, but when she read it, her lips turned pale. There is a third silence, and it will not wait. She dismissed her scribes, closed the palace gates, sent her guards into exile. Alone, she descended into the catacombs beneath the city, deeper than any had gone, into the vaults sealed. During the great betrayal 300 years before, there, amid the bones of those who had failed to protect the realm, she uncovered a chamber none remembered building. A mirror stood in the center. It was not made of glass, but something older, a surface that swallowed light instead of reflecting it. When she approached, it did not show her face, but her name. Not her spoken name, not her royal name. Her first name, the one her mother had whispered into her ear while dying in childbirth. And then it asked her, "Do you wish to be remembered, or do you wish to remember?" She did not hesitate. "I wish to remember." And the mirror shattered, but not into shards, into moments. Suddenly, she was back in the river temple as a girl, lighting oil lamps. She was in the arms of her lover, long dead, kissing beneath the eclipse. She was giving birth to a stillborn child, a secret she had never told a soul. She was holding her brother's hand as he was hanged for treason, mouthing "Forgive me" through the crowd. The serpent had not come for her, had gone to it. Her entire reign, every law, every war, every lie, was nothing but a long path toward this mirror, toward remembering what she had buried to survive. When she awoke, the chamber was gone. She was back in the throne room, though no one had carried her there. Her scrolls had rearranged themselves. The sigils now formed a circle around her. And on the floor, written in salt, was a single phrase: "You are not the Queen of Silence. You are the midwife of memory." She wept then, not from grief, but from clarity. For all her power, all her conquests, all her secrets, none had been hers to keep. They belonged to the world, to the serpent, to the memory that flowed through all things, waiting only for someone to say, "I remember." That night, the stars moved again. A constellation shaped like a crown cracked and vanished from the sky. A comet fell without sound. And far beyond the city, in the deepest part of the mirrored desert, the serpent stirred, not to devour, not to rule, but to listen. because at last someone had spoken its true name. And names once remembered never die. The ink was dry, but the book was not finished. In a forgotten wing of the palace, behind a door sealed for a generation, there sat a single volume, bound in serpent skin, clasped in silence. It breathed faintly, like something that remembered life. No one knew who wrote it. No scribe claimed its authorship. No court poet dared even touch it. Even the queen, once fearless before mirrors and tombs, had passed it by with a bowed head. The book had no name in any language that could be spoken. But it was known by what it did. It bled. Not always, not every day. Only when the world shifted. When buried truths clawed back into the light, then the book would bleed from its spine. A slow crimson trickle, never drying, never fading. Some whispered it contained the first memory. Others believed it was a wound the world had bound in leather and hidden away. Now, as twilight kissed the final tower of the Queen City, the book began to weep once more. And this time, it opened itself. Its pages did not tell a tale in order. No chapter numbers, no dates. Time inside the book folded like a serpent swallowing its own tail. The queen turned the pages slowly, reverently. She saw faces she had never seen, yet somehow always known. She heard voices she had never heard, yet always remembered. A child who dreamed of a golden firebird and awoke blind. An old man who buried an empire in silence, then sang to its bones. A girl who spoke a prophecy backward and made a century forget its own name. Serpent who kissed death and called it love. Her hands trembled. She was reading her own life, but not as she had lived it, as it had been remembered. In this version, she was not a queen, not a mother, not a ruler. She was a bridge, a vessel, a wound through which memory could flow freely again. She turned to the final page. And there, written not in ink, but in breath, was a single line. The one who remembers must be the first to forget. And in that moment, she understood. She summoned no counsel, issued no decree, spoke no farewell. Instead, she returned to the mirrorless chamber, empty still. She placed the bleeding book upon the stone altar, and then for the first time in years, she knelt. She whispered a name, not hers, not the serpent's, the name of the child she had lost, the name she had never let herself say aloud. And the chamber answered not with thunder, not with fire, but with stillness, a deep, aching stillness. Like the hush of snowfall on a battlefield, the bleeding stopped. The book closed. The queen vanished, not died, not ascended, not even forgotten. She simply ceased, as if the world, having finally been remembered properly, no longer needed her shape to carry its sorrow. The throne stood empty. The palace fell into ivy and moss. No epitaph was written, but far beyond the city's edge, in villages that never knew her name, children began to dream again. Not of gold, not of war, but of rivers that sang, and mirrors that forgave. And in those dreams, a voice would sometimes whisper, "Remember gently, forget kindly. Live as if every silence is listening." Years passed, decades. The age of serpents waned. The age of stories rose. A wandering monk, perhaps, mad, perhaps wise, found the book beneath a tree grown from obsidian. He carried it on his back for 30 years, copying fragments into sand and snow, teaching children to write with both hands, one for recording, the other for erasing. Another century passed. The book resurfaced in a desert library, then vanished in a fire that burned blue. But the words had already escaped. They had nested in the mouths of poets, in lullabies sung to the dying, in the silence between funeral drums. They lived now in memory, and memory, once freed, never returns to its cage. They say there are now 3 silences. The first, before the world began. The second, when the world chose to remember. And the third, when the world learns to forget without losing love. And in that third silence, there is a throne no one sits upon, a mirror that only shows what you've forgiven, and a book that waits, quietly, patiently, to bleed again, only when the world is ready to remember itself one more time.